Now moving on with the agenda, item number 49, Wanderlei Silva to appear and provide information of importance to the commission. At this time, this is an opportunity for us as a commission to learn from our staff as to what occurred on the day of May 24th. I will start with Mr. Bennett, and then Mr. Bennett will introduce Jim Kersey, who is our collection specialist on that evening. After that, yes.
You have to slide down one, please. Thank you.
And at that point in time, Mr. Silva will also have an opportunity to provide us information. This is not a disciplinary hearing. This is an information gathering for the commission. The commission is interested in to understand what took place that evening so that we can better make a decision in the interest of the state. Mr. Bennett?
Mr. Guernsey, if you would, please have a seat. At this point in time, I'd like to introduce Mr. Jim Guernsey. He's an independent collector employed to perform collections of blood and urine samples for our out-of-competition fighters, specifically for performance-enhancing drugs. On May 24th, 2014, I directed Mr. Guernsey to collect blood and urine samples from Mr. Silva and Mr. Sonnen. At this time, I'd like Mr. Guernsey to provide you with a little bit of his background. He will go through the process in trying to collect the blood and urine samples from Mr. Silva, and at the conclusion of his remarks, I will have a few remarks as to my efforts in trying to ensure Mr. Silva provided us those samples. Mr. Guernsey, please.
My name's Jim Guernsey. I'm a medical assistant. I've collected blood and urine samples for probably about 34 years. I collect samples for lots of different organizations, including trucking companies, refineries, do insurance exams. I do collections for several other professional sports organizations and blood collections for them as well. So on May 24th, I was asked by Mr. Bennett to collect a sample from Mr. Silva. I took some notes. I think it would be best for me to kind of read through these. I took these the day that I did the collections. So,
Mr. Chairman, can you please speak up? Hard to hear.
Yeah.
do you want me to come up there?
That'd be great.
That'd be great if you don't mind.
Thank you, Jim.
He's coming up to the telephone, Commissioner Marnell.
Can you hear me better?
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Sure. So at 12:50 p.m., I arrived at Mr. Silva's gate. I went to the keypad and I selected his name from the list. The machine dialed, but there was no answer. I then pulled over and tried calling Mr. Silva and his wife. Both numbers I called were disconnected. I later found out that the numbers that I received were incorrect by one number. 12:55 p.m. I called Mr. Bennett. He suggested that I proceed to Mr. Silva's home, which I did. I rang the doorbell and knocked on the door. His dog was barking at the door. No one answered. I wrote Mr. Silva a note, put it on the door, asking him to call me or Bob Bennett because I was needing to meet with him as soon as possible. At 1:04 p.m., I sent Bob a text explaining the above and asked him if he would like me to go to Mr. Silva's gym or to make contact with the other fighter that I need to test. At 1:12 p.m., I received a text from Bob asking me to go to Mr. Silva's gym. When I arrived at the gym, I talked to the person behind the desk and asked him if Mr. Silva was there. He said yes, and I told him I needed to get my things out of my car. I got my supplies and went over to where Mr. Silva was. He had a group of a few people around him. They were eating something. I found the person I thought was Mr. Silva and asked him if he was indeed Mr. Silva, and he told me yes. I then explained that the Nevada Athletic Commission had asked me to come and get a blood and urine sample from him. He said okay and was finishing eating and visiting with the people around him. I gave him some room, they took some pictures, etc. I put my case of supplies by the wall. After they finished taking some pictures, he asked me if he could talk to his manager or trainer. I asked him if this person was at the gym and he said yes. I told him that that was fine and I gave him a little space. I think he had just finished working out. He walked up to the front desk and I followed a little way behind him. He went into an office in the middle of the gym and came out after just a few seconds. He walked back to the front counter and then walked past the office towards the back of the gym and went around the corner to the right. I casually followed behind him. When I turned around, the corner, I realized there was an exit there and a bathroom. I didn't see him anywhere. I went into the bathroom and looked around and didn't see him there. I looked around a little bit more and couldn't find where he went. I went to the front desk and asked the people there if they knew where Mr. Silva went. One of them said that he might have been going to take a shower or change. I kept looking around for a few minutes and I still couldn't find him. I came to the conclusion that he left. 1:47 p.m. I called Bob Bennett and explained quickly what happened. He was in a meeting and said that he'd get right back with me. Shortly after that, Mrs. Silva called the phone at the gym and one of the workers brought the portable phone to me. She was telling me that they were not expecting the blood and urine test and that they would need to do it later. I told her that that wasn't the way it worked and that she had any questions, she would need to talk to Bob Bennett. I asked her phone number and she gave it to me. It was the same number that I had except for one of the numbers was different. I told her that I had been trying to call them, but then I realized I had the wrong number, so I made the corrections in my notes. I told her that we needed to do her husband's test as soon as possible. She asked me to text her Bob Bennett's cell phone number. She said she would contact Bob Bennett and we could talk later. 1:47 p.m. I sent her a text message with Bob Bennett's phone number. She sent me a text back, thank you. I texted back, thank you. Again at 1:47 p.m. I called Bob Bennett quickly and explained the problem. He asked me to text me Mrs. Silva's phone number and said that he would get back with me. 1:51 p.m. I sent Bob Bennett a text with Mrs. Silva's number on it. 1:57 p.m. Bob Bennett called me back and said that he had talked to Mrs. Silva and her husband would cooperate with me now. 2:08 p.m. I called Mrs. Silva and she said she didn't know where her husband was. Maybe he was doing interviews, maybe he was at the MGM Grand, she didn't know. I asked her to have her husband call me back as soon as possible. 2:12 p.m. I tried to call Mr. Silva. There was not an option to leave voicemail. 2:13 p.m. I called Bob Bennett back and explained that Mrs. Silva stated that she didn't know where her husband was. He told me to send Mr. Silva a text and also to proceed to contact the other athlete that I needed to test. 2:14 p.m. I sent Mr. Silva a text. This is Jim. I was at your gym to administer your test. I don't know where you went. Can you please call me back as soon as possible? We need to get your test done. 2:19 p.m. I also sent Bob a text with the number I thought was Mr. Silva's. Again, the number I had was one digit different, so I assumed the same mistake had happened. At that point, I proceeded to make contact with the other athlete that I needed to test, and that's pretty much the majority of my notes. So.
Thank you, Mr. Guernsey.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Guernsey. Some additional information taken directly from the text on my phone on 5/24/14. As Mr. Guernsey said, he texted me at 1:04 p.m. He rang the doorbell, knocked on the door, heard a dog barking, nobody answered, and then he asked me, should he leave or should he go to the gym? I directed him to go to the gym. I would like to move from there to some of my initial notes that I took this date. At 1:59, I called Mrs. Silva. I identified myself and explained the situation to her in detail regarding her husband being obligated to provide a blood and urine sample, and as well as the situation that took place in the gym. I stated to her that her husband was obligated to take the test according to the Nevada Athletic Commission and the UFC. I politely asked her to contact her husband and to have him call me. I provided Mrs. Silva with my cellular telephone number. I asked Mrs. Silva if she understood what I said and that the importance of her husband contacting me. She stated she understood what I said and she would try to contact her husband. At 2:03 p.m. that date, almost immediately after the conversation with Mrs. Silva, I called Executive Mark Ratner of the UFC, and I explained to him that Mr. Silva refused to provide blood and urine sample to our collector. Mr. Ratner advised me that he would contact the UFC personnel and see what he could do. I called the collector, Mr. Guernsey, and advised him of the aforementioned information I just said. I tried to call Mr. Silva, but was unsuccessful. His voicemail was not set up, and therefore I could not leave you a voice message. Instead, I sent you a text message that said, Mr. Silva, a telephone number, which I already said, I left the following message. I said, good afternoon. My name is Bob Bennett, the Executive Director of the Nevada Athletic Commission. I spoke with your wife approximately 30 minutes ago, and I need you to call me immediately at my cellular number, and I left him my cellular number. Then I said, thank you, Mr. Silva. So as you can see, between Mr. Guernsey and myself, we made every possible concerted effort to have Mr. Silva administer a blood and sample urine specimen to us, for which he did not. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Mr. Silva, is there anything you'd like to say at this time, or?
I'm Ross Goodman on behalf of Wanderlei Silva. I'd like to make a couple comments to the commission. Mr. Silva came back, returned from Brazil on June 14th, this Saturday, to get notice of the subpoena. He then contacted my office on Monday, which was yesterday, explaining to me that he wanted to cooperate fully with the commission, even though he just got notice of the subpoena. We're here, and I understand that it's been styled as an informational hearing, and he's here to cooperate and to complete the record. I want to say, first and foremost, that Wanderlei Silva has been fighting for 20 years, has over 50 professional fights, and has never failed a drug test. He's complied with all the rules and regulations of every licensing body. He's here to tell the commission, and he doesn't dispute anything the executive director said, but he's here to say that back in February of this year at the Ultimate Fighter Brazil, in February of this year, he injured his wrist. He was prescribed by the UFC doctors anti-inflammatories. He was scheduled to fight on a May card. Early in May, I believe May 10th of 2014, he was x-rayed and confirmed that he had in fact fractured his right wrist. The UFC then moved that fight on the May card 6 weeks, or approximately 6 weeks, to the July 5th card. Mr. Silva regretfully at that time began taking diuretics. And he was taking diuretics for the sole purpose of minimizing the inflammation to decrease the water retention. He now realizes that he should have submitted to the drug test. He was surprised. It was the first time in his career where something like this, out of competition, somebody showed up at his gym. That doesn't negate or minimize what Mr. Silva did. He's here to apologize to the commission, and he was concerned that the diuretics would show up on the sample. The diuretics and the anti-inflammatories were taken for the sole purpose of trying to rehab his fractured wrist. There should be no inference or suggestion that Mr. Silva was trying to mask or hide any PEDs or TRTs. As a result, Mr. Silva is here to answer any questions that the commission has.
I think it's been well known that this commission has made an effort to eradicate unarmed combat of any illegal drugs or unauthorized drugs. And in that effort, we have developed a drug program that we feel helps us accomplish that goal, both in MMA and in boxing. And this is going to be part of the norm. And this is a situation after accomplishing this goal in previous fights. I think it's well known in the media that this is our effort. I think it's well known that the UFC is working with us in that effort. And this is an example of what can happen if someone does not comply. It's an unfortunate situation. And that's all I have. I'd like to hand it off to my other commissioners if they have any questions or comments at this time.
Well, certainly there can be consequences for failure to comply.
Correct.
Because the very purpose of random testing is to test it when we had selected for the executive director to order that random testing. I'm not suggesting that we conduct any type of consequences, but I certainly think that it would be appropriate for consideration if that was the will of the commission.
Mr. Silva, at the date that the sample was attempted to be taken from you, you knew that you had a fight that was scheduled by the UFC?
Yeah,
And from what I understand from your attorney, that you originally were on the May card, but because of the wrist injury, then that you were moved to the July card.
yeah,
And you knew that you were on either the May or the July card at the time that the sample, the collector was there to take your sample, correct? Let me back up. At the time that the collector showed up to take his sample, he knew that he had a fight scheduled with the UFC either in May or in July. Is that correct?
yeah.
Thank you. Those are the only questions that I have.
Commissioner Marnell, Commissioner Brady, do you have any comments or questions of Mr. Silva or our staff?
I have no comments at this time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Commissioner Marnell?
No, no, Mr. Chairman, pretty clear to me, thank you.
Thank you. The intent was to find out and gather information so that all the commissioners were aware of the facts as it pertained to this situation. The commission will move forward with this drug program. We will take the information we gather today in consideration and make a determination as to what our next step will be.
In the meantime, I would like to thank Mr. Silver for coming back
Yeah.
and attending as far as this hearing, along with bringing your wife in to answer the questions and to hear the inquiries that we had. Thank you very much.
And your able counsel.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate it. I know you didn't have to be there, so thank you for complying with
Thank you,
such
Russ.
notice. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
That concludes, unless the commission would like to have a conversation, I think that concludes item number 49. Are there any further comments from the commission?
The only further comment that I would have is that, based upon the information that we have at this point in time, that we would likely move forward with the disciplinary complaint.
That would be my recommendation. I would hope the other commissioners understand that we have this obligation to protect our fighters, not only those that are consuming the product, but also to those that are not and training hard and working hard to be fighters, and those fighters that are complying with our program and working with us. So with that information, I will move forward with the executive director in determining how we file this complaint with the information we have today. Thank you.